The first clue that something was killing B-24 crews didn't fall from the sky in flaming wreckage. It whispered from a factory wing that hadn't even flown yet. In the winter of 1943, while young Liberator trainees were dying in clear Florida weather, with no enemy action and no mechanical cause written into every report, Willow Run was proudly announcing that it could build a bomber faster than Detroit built a car. One every hour, no excuses, no delays. But beneath the thunder of stamping presses and the nerve-grinding chatter of rivet guns, something quieter had begun repeating itself like a warning no one wanted to hear. A wing section came gliding down the line, its aluminum skin still warm from the annealing ovens. A foreman paused mid-stride. There on the leading edge, exactly where airflow pressures would someday lash hardest, one row of rivets drifted off the intended line, bending like a cracked rib, setting itself at the wrong angle, off by a few millimeters, off in the same place where earlier wings had shown the same defiant curve, and off in the exact region where, just hours earlier, a B-24 in Florida had shed half its right wing cleanly enough that investigators could find no smoke, no explosion, no impact damage, just metal that had given up. On any other night, it might have been brushed aside as fatigue, a tired worker, a sloppy shift, something the next crew could drill out and correct. But this was the third documented pattern in a week. Paperwork spread across steel desks in a cramped office at the plant's edge. Serial numbers and jig logs were traced with blunt pencils. Nothing fit. The B-24's Davis wing, elegant, thin, designed for long-range speed, was a masterpiece, but unforgiving. Stress traveled through it like electricity through wire. One misaligned path could turn vibration into a fatal resonance. The foreman stared longer than he usually allowed himself. That tiny, crooked line seemed less like a mistake and more like a confession. Like the metal itself was trying to tell what had killed the Florida crew. And somewhere in the noise of Willow Run's unstoppable assembly line, it felt as if something had begun to crack beneath the surface. Not in the wing, but in the system that created it. Willow Run didn't breathe like a normal factory. It lived in a constant mechanical exhale. The mile-long structure had been built in a rush of wartime optimism, a place where Henry Ford promised to prove that aircraft could be produced the way his Model T had been. Predictable, rapid, nearly automatic. By early 1943, nearly 40,000 workers surged through rotating shifts, and the plant felt more like a controlled stampede than a workplace. Each station was a timed ritual: clamp, align, drill, rivet, move. Precision, in theory, was supposed to come from the jigs and fixtures themselves. Human judgment wasn't meant to matter, but beneath the triumphal propaganda reels was a truth far less cinematic. The B-24's Davis wing, Consolidated's aerodynamic gamble, was never designed for relentless automotive speed. It was thin-skinned, high-aspect, and uniquely sensitive to any deviation in its internal structure. Built by hand in San Diego, it worked beautifully. Built at scale in Michigan, under exhaustion and deafening noise, it tolerated almost nothing. Workers on the night shift could feel it before engineers admitted it. Panels sometimes resisted the jigs. Drill guides fought the metal. Ribs didn't sit perfectly in their fixtures unless hammered into obedience. Under daylight, these deviations were slight, barely worth a note. Under fatigue, the wrong brace, the wrong clamp, the wrong angle multiplied across hundreds of aircraft. Reports from the field seemed distant and abstract at first. Odd humming at crews, unexplained skin cracks on training planes, wings that felt alive in turbulence. But when investigators layered these reports over the crooked rivet locations, a pattern began to emerge. All incidents clustered around the same load-bearing region of the right wing, where the jig's slightest misalignment could twist the structure just enough to redirect aerodynamic stress. The foreman who had stopped at the wing edge didn't know the calculations, but he knew trouble when he saw a line misbehaving the same way 3 times. The system that was supposed to remove error had instead mass-produced it. In a factory built to prove speed was everything, the metal was beginning to whisper the cost. The investigation narrowed to a name: a 22-year-old riveter who worked the night shifts, a kid who still carried the posture of someone new to industrial war. When asked about the crooked pattern, he didn't defend himself. didn't panic. He simply explained what he had felt. The drill guide didn't sit right. The metal seemed to tug downward. It had happened before. Supervisors told him to force it. That night he didn't. He riveted where the metal wanted the tool to go. A strange sentence for an engineer, yet it changed everything. Following that intuition, investigators returned to the upstream subassembly bay. Under the glare of portable lamps, they found the truth hiding in bolts shaken loose by weeks of vibration. A jig, massive, steel, supposedly immovable, had shifted by fractions no human eye would notice, but every wing would inherit. That slight distortion twisted the load path through the spar, planting a flaw deep inside the structure before final assembly even began. While engineers measured the deviation in stunned silence, new reports arrived from training units. Another B-24 showing early-stage cracking in the same region, another vibration issue, another pilot describing a hum he couldn't explain. The riveter's refusal to force his tool had exposed a flaw far larger than his own shift. His crooked line was the only honest mapping of a distortion otherwise buried under the speed of wartime production. Suddenly, the Florida crash didn't look like bad luck. It looked like a warning, a structural flaw repeated across dozens, maybe hundreds, of Liberators, enough to cost entire squadrons without a single bullet fired. The investigation had started with a bent line of rivets. Now it was pointing toward a deeper question. How many wings leaving Willow Run already carried the seed of their own destruction? Cold winds scraped against the fuselage as the engineering test B-24 climbed over Lake Erie, its wings equipped with accelerometers and strain gauges. The crew on board knew what they were hunting, the invisible line between vibration and catastrophic flutter. To cross that line meant risking their lives, but not crossing it meant risking thousands more. At lower speeds, the aircraft behaved normally. But as the Liberator accelerated into the range pilots had quietly complained about, the wing began to tremble. Not like turbulence, but like something internal, structural. The oscillation deepened until the controls shook, and the co-pilot saw the right wing twist in a way no aircraft should. For an instant, history nearly repeated the Florida tragedy. The pilot throttled back with calm urgency, guiding the bomber away from the deadly resonance. They had found it. The exact speed where aerodynamic force exploited the jig-induced twist, turning vibration into a runaway feedback loop that could rip a wing off in seconds. Flutter wasn't a theory anymore. It was alive, and it had almost killed them. On the ground, the data told the same story. The misalignment added a torsional weakness at a critical frequency. At cruising altitude, the wing behaved. At high speed, it tried to tear itself apart. Engineers from Ford and Consolidated met through the night. They needed a fix that fit into a factory already operating at maximum pressure. The answer was radical but necessary. Reinforce the spar joint. Lock the jigs against microshifts. Redesign drill templates so riveters physically could not follow a distorted line. One more test flight would decide everything. The next dawn over Lake Erie would determine whether truth or speed would define Willow Run's legacy. Frost crackled under the bomber's tires as the reworked B-24 rolled onto the runway. This aircraft carried more than structural changes. It carried the factory's reputation and the safety of every crew who would ever trust a Liberator wing to stay attached in combat. As the engines roared, the plane lifted cleanly into the winter air. At 2,000 feet, everything felt textbook. At 8,000 feet, the first faint hum appeared, the same frequency that had signaled disaster before. The crew braced, the wing flexed, and then nothing. No runaway vibration, no twisting. The reinforced spar and corrected alignment absorbed the stress and sent it harmlessly through the structure. The demon that had haunted the Davis wing had been pushed out of the operating envelope. Willow Run shifted instantly. Jigs were recalibrated, rivet templates replaced, inspection teams retrained to listen to the behavior of metal, not just measure its dimensions. Aircraft from the corrected production lines reached Europe and North Africa, and maintenance logs quietly began to reflect the difference. Fewer unexplained cracks, fewer vibration complaints, fewer structural repairs after heavy flak runs. Pilots noticed too. The Liberator, often mocked for its cardboard wings, began to earn a steadier reputation. Crews who once gripped the controls in turbulent banking turns now felt the aircraft respond with a confidence it had lacked before. And somewhere in the plant, the young riveter whose crooked line had started all this was reassigned to inspection work. His instincts validated, his honesty quietly celebrated, even if wartime secrecy meant few ever learned his name. But the war wasn't done revealing what the flawed jigs had already embedded in earlier aircraft. There were still wings overseas, whose metal held secrets from the early months of misalignment, and those secrets were about to surface. By spring 1944, Willow Run was hitting the numbers that filled newspapers with patriotic pride, one Liberator every 59 minutes. But inside the plant, engineers saw something different, a system moving so fast it barely remembered itself. Workers rotated too quickly to retain hard-earned instincts. Entire crews changed before subtle problems could be sensed, understood, and taught. Meanwhile, the redesigned wings were performing well in combat. Missions over Ploesti, Magdeburg, and Merseburg demanded sharp evasive turns, brutal gust loads, and chaotic turbulence. The new structures held, but early block aircraft, built before the correction, remained in service, flying into the same hell with flaws aging quietly inside their spars. Whenever a jig drifted even slightly, quality teams now ordered full stoppages. Some managers complained. Pilots did not. They understood that a minor deviation in Michigan could become a fatal structural failure over Germany. Slowly, a new culture formed, one where riveters reported strange vibrations in jigs, inspectors trusted their fingertips as much as their gauges, and engineers looked for meaning in small anomalies instead of dismissing them. The rivet became more than a fastener. It became a point where human judgment met industrial war. But as 1944 progressed, and older aircraft returned from brutal missions, subtle clues resurfaced. Hairline cracks, fatigue marks, areas of skin that felt wrong to the touch. The question no one wanted to ask was becoming unavoidable. Had the earlier misalignment already written doom into dozens of wings still in combat? Late 1944 brought something Willow Run had rarely possessed: time to breathe. With output stabilizing, engineers launched a full structural audit on early war wings. Using dye-penetrant tests and magnification techniques unavailable during peak production, they exposed what the metal had been hiding. Micro cracks, invisible under daylight, deadly under stress, and all located in the same region that the misaligned jig had once distorted. Dozens of aircraft overseas still carried these flaws. Urgent bulletins flashed across commands. Ground crews crawled across wing surfaces in freezing hangars with lamps and dye kits, searching for the faint red threads that revealed cracks too small to see. Some aircraft were immediately grounded. Others received emergency reinforcement plates flown from Willow Run with top priority. The riveter's crooked line, once a curiosity, now looked like the moment the war's largest aircraft plant had been forced to confront the consequences of its own speed. The flaw hadn't been in careless hands. It had been in steel fixtures, structural assumptions, and the belief that precision could be automated out of human judgment. Across the factory, the audit reshaped how workers saw their own labor. A line that drifted by millimeters could be the only clue that saved a squadron. A jig's faint vibration could be the difference between a bomber returning or disintegrating over the Alps. The war had produced millions of parts and thousands of aircraft. But this discovery made one truth painfully clear: complexity fails first in silence, long before anything breaks loudly. When Willow Run finally went quiet in 1945, the silence felt heavier than the machinery ever had. Where sparks once flew, dust settled. Where rivet guns once hammered, only echoes remained. Yet the liberators it built kept flying, over oceans, mountains, and cities scarred by war, carrying something that couldn't be measured on blueprints: the lessons learned from a single crooked line. Every wing that stayed intact during flak bursts, every bomber that held formation in storm winds, every crew that survived turbulence that once would have torn early structures apart, all owed something to the moment the metal told the truth, and one riveter refused to hide it. Post-war engineers would later define entire fields: fracture mechanics, life cycle fatigue analysis, structural reliability. based on lessons first whispered inside that mile-long factory. But for the men and women who lived those nights, it remains simpler. Listen when the machine pushes back. Question the pattern that shouldn't exist. Trust the moment something feels wrong. In the emptying hall, light from high windows fell across the faint marks on the concrete where the flawed jig had once stood. The war was over. The wings were safe. And a small act of honesty, dismissed at first as laziness, had become part of the unseen architecture that kept thousands alive. Some warnings scream in fire and metal. Others arrive as a crooked line that refuses to lie.